David, big news in the aviation world.
Yeah, the president is about to board his new plane.
Yeah, this week will be the inaugural flight of the new Air Force One, which was, of course, gifted to him by
Qatar.
Exactly. Massive controversy over that. We talked about it a long time ago on the podcast. A spanking new, well, no, not, in fact, a second-hand. Who would have thought Trump would want a second-hand plane? But there you go. He has taken ownership of a second-hand Boeing 747-800, which was once owned by the Qatari royal family. It is a flying palace. It's been down in the south of the United States being refitted, hasn't it?
You describe it as a flying palace. You know, US presidents tend to borrow Air Force One, but the vibe from Donald Trump is that Air Force One has borrowed him.
Exactly. And it's a gift. It was free and it's been retrofitted. It's been made security safe and all the rest of it. But I discovered the other day that in order to keep this one Air Force One Boeing 747 flying, and this was the gifted one, the US Air Force has had to spend $400 million buying two more Boeing jumbo jets from Lufthansa, the German flag carrier. Why? Well, one of them is going to be used as flight training for the Air Force One pilots, and the other one is going to be used as spare parts for the principal plane, because, of course, Boeing no longer makes jumbo jets. So doesn't sound like quite a good deal, does it? He got gifted one, but they had to buy two more to keep the first one in the air.
A rather expensive gift.
It's Mark here.
And David.
And we are both in Washington, D.C.
where it has been a big, bad day for Donald Trump in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it has. Surely you'll remember in 2023, a few years ago now, a bombshell courtroom verdict found that candidate Trump, as he was then, was liable for sexually abusing magazine columnist E. Jean Carroll. Well, he appealed, claiming it was all nonsense, and now the highest court in the land is refusing to hear the appeal.
We'll also talk about the other major rulings, including a defeat for Trump on mail-in ballots or postal votes, depending where you're from, a more mixed decision involving Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, and a separate ruling that does give him more power over independent regulators.
So, David, it is that time of year again, the time of year where we all sit at 10 o'clock once a week usually, looking at one particular website, don't we?
Yeah, the Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS.
SCOTUS, as it's known, that's the acronym, the highest court in the land. And at this sort of time every year, before they break up for the summer, they make judgments, rulings, decisions on really, really big cases. And because it's the highest court in the land, the judgments, the rulings that they make, they're final. And it always is the case, and I remember this in the past few years, big things like the abortion ruling, Roe versus Wade, so many others have been made right at the end of the term. So you're waiting for the last day, and this week is the last 2 days where the 9 Supreme Court justices have made rulings, and there have been some big ones.
Yeah, we're still waiting on big rulings related to birthright citizenship, campaign finance, and transgender women in female sports. They are due on Tuesday morning.
Yeah, so by the time you listen to this, those may have happened. They may go one way or the other, but we got big ones Monday, didn't we?
We did, and one more personal than the others. In 2023, a civil jury found that Donald Trump had sexually abused and later defamed E. Jean Carroll, the writer, and they awarded her $5 million. Now, she alleged he had assaulted her in the dressing room of a department store back in 1996, and then defamed her by describing those allegations as a con job and a hoax.
A con job and a hoax. You can hear him saying it, can't you? The jury's decision in 2023 was unanimous. I remember covering the case. It was absolutely huge at the time. He was accused and then found liable. It was a civil trial, a civil court, so he wasn't found guilty but found liable for sexually abusing and defaming Carroll. The decision was then upheld by an appeals court, but it wound its way up to the Supreme Court, as you say, the highest court in the land. And the court's decision prevents further challenges on this particular case.
Yes, Trump's lawyers had argued that E. Jean Carroll hadn't reported the alleged offence to police at the time, that there were no witnesses, and that the judge shouldn't have allowed the jury to hear what they called unrelated evidence. That's evidence from two other women who had accused him of sexual misconduct, allegations he strenuously denies. And they said the jury shouldn't have been allowed to hear the infamous Access Hollywood tape in which he makes disparaging remarks about women. But the Supreme Court rejected his attempt to appeal. They don't have to state why, and that means the verdict stands and he will have to pay her $5 million.
Yeah, he'll have to cough up. He will have to pony up the money, won't he? $5 million plus interest. So that's quite a substantial amount of money, although maybe not for the president. I mean, in short, he has claimed all along this is nonsense. He says, I've never met the woman. This is all part of a wider witch hunt. And it wound his way up to the highest court in the land, which is weighted in his favour. And they said, la, 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 not interested, not even going to look at this case. There have been statements, of course, from E. Jean Carroll's attorney, from Trump himself. We'll read through E. Jean Carroll's attorney first of all. They say today's Supreme Court decision affirms once and for all the jury's unanimous verdict that President Donald J. Trump sexually assaulted and defamed E. Jean Carroll. His multiple efforts to appeal that verdict have all failed, and today's ruling ends his quest to avoid accountability for his actions. Look, I mean, just reading that, it is quite remarkable, isn't it, that you know, we're talking about a sitting president of the United States who has been unable to appeal a case in which he has been found liable for sexually assaulting and defaming a woman. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? Donald Trump has responded on Truth Social. He has called the case fake. He has said it is lawfare. Surprisingly, so he says, the Supreme Court declined to review a fake case brought against me by a woman I never met. Brackets, decades-old celebrity photo line standing with her husband does not count. Reference there that he was once photographed in a line with her. He says, I will continue the fight against this weaponization and lawfare case against me, including the ridiculous claim of defamation, with all my power and strength. And he goes on to say the case is against the United States of America and all it stands for, etc., etc. So a pushback, as you might expect, from the president. But as you say, David, this is something that he's going to have to cough up because it can't go any further. It's hit the buffers at the top of the law tree here in the United States.
Yes, it ends his challenge to that verdict. This was his final avenue for recourse. The court, interestingly, Mark, did not issue any dissents or public objections to the Conservative majority, and I think that is worth considering because many will say that is not an endorsement of the original verdict. It is simply the Supreme Court choosing to not intervene in this case. But the factual findings remain, and therefore he will have to cough up.
I think that last point is really important because there is a tendency, of course, that some will look at this and think, well, the assumption, therefore, by not taking up the case, clearly the Supreme Court was in effect endorsing E. Jean Carroll's case, that the justices agreed with the verdict that Trump did sexually abuse her. That's not the case, though. The concept of finality, not endorsement, is relevant here. The court has refused even to look at the case, and so it is not making a judgment either way. Of course, there have been moments before now where the court's decision not to take up a case has very much led people to believe that the justices are taking a position. No, we are not, is what the justices would say if they ever appeared, but they are kind of these figures in the shadows, aren't they?
Yeah, and they've had a busy day because the Carroll case wasn't the only one before the Supreme Court, particularly relating to President Trump. The justices also issued rulings in a series of other matters. Yeah,
Lisa Cook is a name you may or may not be familiar with. She is on the board of the Federal Reserve, America's central bank, which helps set interest rates and has huge influence, of course, over the US economy and, frankly, the global economy. Trump tried to fire her over alleged mortgage fraud, which she denies. And the question for the Supreme Court was whether she could be removed straight away while the legal fight continues. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that she cannot be removed while she contests the decision, her firing, and so it is an interim ruling. Her legal team have argued that allowing him to sack her while litigation was underway would cause economic turmoil and undermine the independence of the central bank.
But And I think it is a significant but, Mark. In a separate case, the court cleared the way for the president to fire independent regulators despite federal laws that are meant to protect them. In another case tested whether he could remove a woman called Rebecca Kelly Slaughter, a Democratic member of the Federal Trade Commission, simply because she doesn't support his agenda. Now, that represents a significant shift in power from Congress to the president, and it could have implications for at least a dozen other agencies.
Yeah.
And that explains why the president has posted online at least twice about this Slaughter case, describing it as a big win. He said, "Today's historic Slaughter decision by the Supreme Court is the greatest increase in presidential power in the last 100 years. Such a monumental ruling at such an important time."
Yeah, so that was a win for him for sure in a day which otherwise was full of defeats.
And not the first time this conservative-leaning court has given with one hand and taken away with the other in twin rulings.
Yeah, exactly. And so for this imperial president, that is an important moment for sure. Not so good, though, on mail-in ballots, right?
Another big issue that's been on the president's agenda for a long time.
Yeah, because it touches on one of Trump's longest-running political grievances, voting by post. He hates it. He thinks it is the basis of all fraud. He also thinks it's the reason that the 2020 election was stolen from him, as he says. So the Supreme Court has been looking at whether states can keep counting ballots after Election Day, but it hasn't worked out in his favor. We should say that postal voting is what we're talking about here. Mail-in ballots in America, postal voting in many other parts of the world. It's allowed here, and even if ballots arrive after Election Day, they can still be counted as long as they were date stamped on Election Day, and that is what the Supreme Court is upholding.
Yeah, the case before the justices was whether Mississippi state law was at odds with federal law on this issue. The Republican Party argued that it is federal law that establishes Election Day as the deadline. But the three Liberal justices pointed out that it is the Constitution that directs each individual state to set election regulations.
Those pesky Liberals.
So
upholding democracy, upholding the Constitution. I don't know.
So it means that Mississippi law and other similar laws in at least 18 states, I read, will remain in place, and that avoids a big upheaval in the run-up to the midterm elections.
Yeah.
The ruling, which a lot of people were waiting for, that was a ruling that was, I think it was very detrimental to honest elections. But it is what it is. Basically, they're keeping it a little bit the way it is now.
I do wonder, though, whether this may be a legal loss for him, this mail-in ballots issue, but a political win, because it's going to allow him, I think, to push forward the reform that he wants to see passed through Congress. He wants to tighten up the rules, make it that much harder to vote, requiring certain hoops to be jumped through. At the moment, that is held up on Capitol Hill. He will use this ruling to try and give him a bit of impetus there.
And Mark, there is one more ruling that actually happened at the back end of last week that we should talk about too.
Yeah, we should. I hope you're all still with us. This is a legally heavy episode, but it's really important because it's the foundation of everything, isn't it? And at this time of year, as we said, there are a lot of very important judgments that come through. And late last week, since we were last in here in the studio, there were some other big rulings as well, not least on immigration. A win for Team Trump on his immigration agenda, as the Supreme Court ruled that he can strip protected status from hundreds of thousands of Haitian and Syrian migrants.
So let's just explain what TPS is, temporarily protected status. It allows people already in the US to stay and work legally if their home country is considered too dangerous or unstable because of war, disaster or major unrest. Haiti came under that bracket after the earthquake in 2010.
Yeah, 350,000 Haitians have TPS, temporary protected status, here in the United States. Many of them have made this place their home over the years since they were first given protected status. They contribute clearly to the American economy. They pay taxes, and some of them, of course, will have made families here, children who because they were born here, will be American citizens. So this is a wrench for sure. It is very, very difficult for many Haitians and indeed Syrians. 6.5 or just under 6,500 Syrians have TPS in the country here in the US after civil war broke out in Syria, as we all remember, back in 2012. So these are people who are already living in the US under protection, not people who have newly arrived at the border. And so I think we possibly will see a resurgence of what we saw last year with ICE agents moving into parts of the country where these folk are living and asking for their papers. And if they are discovered to be Haitian on TPS or Syrian on TPS, well, then they will be sent home. It's another sign that on immigration, the court is siding with President Trump.
Now, Trump's argument is that the residency is meant to be what it says on the tin, temporary, but people have stayed for years.
Yeah, and I actually think he does have a point there, and this is kind of getting to the very heart of a broken immigration process, a process of immigration and asylum that's broken here as it is in so many other parts of the Western world. And the failure of successive governments to deal with the system, because hard decisions need to be made, has resulted in this particular presidency and this particular president and hardliners within his own administration making very, very tough decisions because they believe that all this is crazy and it cannot go on. Have a listen to Stephen Miller, who's kind of effectively the Prime Minister of the United States, isn't he? He deals with all domestic policy. He's the Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House, but seems to hold so much power, almost giving him prime ministerial status if something like that existed in the United States. On Friday, he was outside the White House, cock-a-hoop about this decision the Supreme Court has made.
If you no longer have status in this country, then you're supposed to be deported. And in particular, in the case of the Haitians, the Biden administration flew over vast numbers. It's hard to know the exact number, but probably more than 1 million illegal immigrants from Haiti. And that's not counting the border crossings into the United States. So these are people who've only been here for a few months, who are receiving welfare, whose all their ties, all their social connections, all their family is back in their home country of Haiti. And of course, that's where they should go.
So there we go, David. There is, on America's 250th birthday, this country made up of immigrants.
And before we finish, Mark, we should point out that there are still some big decisions due from the Supreme Court. 3 rulings on Tuesday morning, we expect. One challenging laws in Idaho and West Virginia that restrict transgender girls and women from competing in female sports. Another on whether federal limits on coordinated spending between political parties and candidates violate the First Amendment. A ruling striking down the limits would really change campaign funding here. And then there's the big one on birthright citizenship. For 150 years, almost every child born in the United States has had the right to citizenship. But on his very first day back in office, President Trump signed an executive order to overturn that. The administration says that right to citizenship should not apply to children born to people here unlawfully or here on a temporary visa for work or education. Of course, Donald Trump felt so strongly about this issue, he became the first president in history to attend oral arguments about it at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but he didn't last long, did he? He walked out at one point. It's worth saying that's how it works. There are no cameras in the Supreme Court, but you can go in and you can hear the oral arguments. Equally, they are played, so you can listen wherever you are to what their oral arguments are. Then there is a delay of weeks and weeks, sometimes months, sometimes even longer before they actually come to a judgment. So we got the oral arguments some time ago on birthright citizenship. It suggested, and you can always get a sense of which way the court's going to go from those oral arguments, it suggested that they will not vote, will not come to a judgment in favour of what the president wants. In other words, they will maintain the concept of birthright citizenship. If they don't, and by the time you're listening to this, they will have made a judgment probably. If they don't, well, and suddenly you're not automatically an American citizen if you're born here, well, that is a bombshell. So we're going to keep across all that. Stay tuned to Sky News platforms for all of it.
I should say the president walked out after the Solicitor General, representing the government, said the world had changed. 8 million people can be here on a plane ride and give birth to American citizens. One of the Liberal justices replied, yes, the world has changed. The Constitution remains the same. So I think he knew which way it appeared to be leaning. That prompted the walkout. And the president subsequently posted online, we're the only country stupid enough in the world to have birthright citizenship. So the outcome either way is going to be a big deal for this presidency.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Thank you as ever for listening. And if you haven't yet, why haven't you subscribed to become a Sky News Insider? You must. It's excellent and it is a bargain. £2.99 a month or $29.99 a year.
Yeah, you'll get a weekly newsletter plus bonus episodes, including the one from last weekend where Mark and I did a Q&A special. We covered a lot of ground, didn't we? Including what it's like inside the Oval Office. If you've any question, of course, do write it in the comments or send it to trump100@sky.uk.
Martha and James, all being well, will be back for Friday's episode from inside Venezuela, of course talking about the earthquake, but with the opportunity to ask Venezuelans what they think of President Trump. It's going to be a corker. Stay tuned for that. But that's it from us.
Yeah, bye-bye.